ambassadors, distinguished guests, to the Institute for the Danube region in Central Europe here in our seminar room in Vienna, Alsergrund. My name is Sebastian Schäffer. I'm the director of the IDM, and I have the pleasure to welcome today a wonderful set of experts, but first and foremost, two of our long-standing cooperation partners, the Embassy of Bulgaria and the Embassy of Croatia, which are NATO contact embassies. Today we have a wonderful panel discussion, which is called From Challenge to Capability. We will hear some introductory words from Madam Ambassador Desislava Najdinova-Gospodinova, and then from the First Secretary of the Embassy of the Republic of Croatia, Igor Kolar. Unfortunately, His Excellency Ambassador Glunčić has to attend a meeting of the Three Seas Initiative on short notice, but we have some introductory words here as well from our partners. And then we will dive into the panel discussion. As you know, our formats, we are on the one hand side open for questions from the room. You are kindly reminded to keep them short and simple and direct them to the people on the panel. We are also live streaming this on our YouTube channel, and you can join through the webinar where there is a possibility to also raise questions should that be the case. That's the housekeeping rules for the time being. And with this, I would like to ask Her Excellency Madam Ambassador, to give some introductory words. Thank you very much.
Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, dear Mr. Schäffer, welcome also on my behalf to today's panel discussion From Challenge to Capability, Shared Security in a Changing Europe. I would like to thank our partners, the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe, for organizing and kindly hosting this event, and to Mr. Sebastian Schäffer, Director of the Institute, and Ms. Sofia Baiter, Research Fellow, for their invaluable support and tireless work. Allow me also to thank our panelists, Mr. Thomas Stallinger, former Federal Minister for Defense of Austria, former Security Policy Advisor at the Austrian Foreign Ministry, and former Austrian military representative to the EU and NATO. Ms. Ionela Ciulan, Research Officer at the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies, and Ulrich Schneckener, Professor of International Relations and Peace Conflict Studies at the Osnabrück University. This event is organized in our capacity together with the Embassy of Croatia in Austria as NATO Joint Contact Points Embassies in Austria. Ladies and gentlemen, for many years, Europe has enjoyed a long and unprecedented period of peace. For generations, the memory of war on our continent seemed distant, replaced by a shared vision of cooperation, economic growth, and prosperity. However, war has returned on our continent, and it has reminded us that peace must never be taken for granted. Europe's security is more uncertain than it has been in decades. We are experiencing structural shifts and changes of an unprecedented magnitude. In times of growing uncertainty, it is our conviction that our unity, cooperation, partnership, and solidarity are needed more than ever. There is no doubt that we live in challenging times, but challenges can also serve as catalysts for becoming stronger and more resilient, for building the capabilities needed to meet the growing challenges we face. In recent months, a lot has been achieved, probably more than in the last decades. Still more can and needs to be done. I'm looking forward to the valuable insights and thoughts of the panelists, the discussion afterwards on what is needed to transform challenges into capabilities and to unlock new opportunities. Thank you for your presence and thank you for your partnership.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, and I hand over to Igor Konov.
Dear Director Schäfer, distinguished panelists, esteemed excellencies and military attaches, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, let me use this opportunity to excuse His Excellency Ambassador Glunčić once again for not being able to join us today due to his urgent obligations in Zagreb. However, it is an honor to welcome you all here on his behalf as an official representative of the Croatian Embassy. Of course, together with our dear Bulgarian colleagues, with whom we have the honor to share a joint mandate on the NATO Contact Point Embassy since January last year. Last but not least, I would like also to express our gratitude to our loving hosts, to the IDM, Director Schäfer, Mrs. Baiter, and all other colleagues from IDM who were very generous and helpful in support of preparing this event. Last but not least, also to our esteemed panelists who joined us today. Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing challenging times in which reinforcing defense capacities, interoperability, and readiness to jointly respond to any current or future threats is of utmost importance. Both the EU and NATO provide framework for shared security in a changing world order. Croatia sees itself as a constructive member of both EU and NATO, and an active contributor to peace and stability. As the newest member state of the EU, Croatia also demonstrates that the EU is an engine of security, stability, and prosperity, both for candidate countries and for other EU member states. As a reliable ally, Croatia remains equally committed to stability and European perspective of wider European area, including Western Balkans. We see EU and NATO's role today in current context as almost equally important as it was for us in the 1990s, which is an additional reason why we remain open to share our experiences and strongly support the perspective of Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic integration and future. Amidst shifting global geopolitical landscape, EU is currently investing significant effort to address the threats to the EU citizens and interests, ranging from high security and military risks to hybrid attacks and economic rivalry. In this view, strengthening the European defense and security architecture should be an essential part of the joint endeavor. In this light, may I give word to our host, to Director Schäfer, and our esteemed panelists, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for these kind introductory words and setting the stage. I think Madam Ambassador has already introduced my panel, and I will use the time because I have a lot of questions. I can see that there are very knowledgeable people in the room that will also have questions. So we dive right into it if that is fine for everyone. And I will have a first question to all three panelists, but we'll start with Ionela online. And my question is, what is one uncomfortable truth about European security that we still avoid saying openly, either in Brussels, where you are, in national capitals, or also here in Austria? Ionela, please.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I apologize that I couldn't be in person with you in Vienna this evening because I have to be for work commitment tomorrow morning in Brussels. But to answer your question, from the Brussels perspective, it seems like a significant part of the European societies and political leadership remains complacent, reluctant to fully grasp the ongoing shift that we have in the transatlantic relations or to recognize Russia as an existential threat to the continent. And I say that because many still assume that once the war in Ukraine will end, relations with Russia can return to business as usual. And at the same time, a part of our European citizens and political leaders, they still believe that President Trump and the current US administration represent a temporary deviation in the transatlantic partnership, and the transatlantic ties will eventually revert to their previous form. Well, this assumption is misguided and incorrect from my perspective because what we see is that we are in a historic moment in the international relations where the international world order is changing from a unipolar moment of United States multilateralism to a moment based on multipolarity. So, of course, also the priorities are changing. For the first time in the transatlantic relations in the past 80 years, we see that United States and Europe don't see eye to eye when it comes to Russia. For Europeans and the EU, Russia is an existential threat, and there are a lot of intelligence and security analysis speaking that Russia might attack the European continent even after end of war in Ukraine, while United States in their recent published strategic documents, the National Security Strategy and National Defense strategy, they see Russia as a manageable threat for the Eastern Europeans and only see the Russian nuclear capabilities as a potential threat for the American homeland. But they don't say anything about Europe. And we see, of course, this strategic shift from the US interest in Europe towards Indo-Pacific and Western Hemisphere. So, of course, there is a paradigm change. Of course, this is a challenge, which can also be an opportunity to transform the transatlantic relations into a more resilient partnership in the future, where we can build a more equal-based transatlantic partnership between the Europeans and Americans, if the Europeans will take their commitment seriously to invest in becoming security providers for the conventional defense and deterrence of the continent.
Thank you very much. And there is already a lot, and yeah, Ulrich.
Well, actually, I can follow up from that. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, Sebastian, and the two embassies for that opportunity to talk to you here. And I can only follow up from what has been said and maybe put it even more bluntly in a sense, because we have the uncomfortable truth that there is one big neighbor of the EU which already attacks the European state and is threatening to attack others, while our former ally, I would call it a former ally to some extent, across the Atlantic tells us, I don't know if I will protect you against this threat, and thereby undermining NATO credibility virtually every day, I would say. So in other words, European security has to be organized against Russia, against Putin's Russia, but largely without the US. And you can try to frame that positively in a certain sense, as Ursula von der Leyen did, when she called that situation Europe's independence moment. But on the other hand, it's quite a dull situation when you see this kind of dual Zeitenwende. I use this German, Zeitenwende term because actually we have to deal with two different types of Zeitenwende at the same time. Well, that is, I think, all well known, well documented. Also, there are a number of leaders who speak about it, be it Macron, be it Chancellor Merz, Kaja Kallas, von der Leyen, EU Commissioner Kubilius, Defense Commissioner. I think they all have, in their rhetoric, in their speeches, they all have addressed this situation. But the question is, are EU leaders really willing and able to take up that dual Zeitenwende, this challenge? And even if they would agree on that assessment, which they don't, many of them tend not to speak too open and too loud, at least, about this dual Zeitenwende posed by Putin and Trump. First of all, because of a number of domestic constraints we can see at the political level in different EU member states. There is also a certain reluctancy within the publics, which has to be addressed by politicians. There are upcoming elections which interfere here. It's always easy for us experts to be open and loud, but we don't need to be elected. Also different national security cultures play a role still in different member states. And of course, our Austrian colleague can say more about that regard to Austria. And others don't talk about that too loud because they still want to please Trump and keep the US in as long as possible. So part of the uncomfortable truth is also, more, you don't want to speak it too loud. You don't want to risk that Trump and the US withdraws too quickly from European security. But I think there's also another reason here why this is an open truth, which maybe is not so much discussed, at least with the electorates, with the publics, because of the wider implications of that truth, of this dual Zeitenwende. Because if you take that seriously in its essence, then you realize that the piecemeal and step-by-step approach towards European security, which has been taken so far, be it within the EU, also be it within NATO, or outside both organizations. We see also some development in more like informal groupings, does not live up to this serious challenge, basically. Because it would require bold steps. Both are they are both costly and unpopular to take these steps. And also political leadership is needed to convince reluctant and even more reluctant European public in the midst of an EU-wide economic crisis at the same time. So this is on top of that. So we're talking of a situation where Europe is economically not so well off as it has been a couple of years ago. And at the same time, we have to invest and do more for defense and security.
Thank you very much.
I could make it easy now because everything has already been said.
Sorry.
I would like to point my finger a little bit more or deeper into the wounds which have already been mentioned. The first fact is that Europe still heavily remains dependent on US military power, specifically when we talk about transatlantic force protection, and I say definitely it's also the US nuclear umbrella, which is spanning over Europe. And there we come already into a deep political discussion because it's not just about money, Here you have to convince a broad part of the population, and I don't see any success even in starting this kind of discussion with the population. And you mentioned it already. Beside the security factor, we have a lot of other construction sites in Europe. It's our demography. It's our dependency on external resources. We just see it in the conflict in the Middle East. It's about seldom resources, not only in the Middle East. For example, I was not aware of that, but 90% of the worldwide used magnesium derives from China. And you need that, for example, in the constructions of airplanes, because it's the second part you use for aluminium. Just to mention this one, and all those, and I always come back to Borrell, is that I think it was 3-4 years ago in an EU ambassadors conference, the wealthiness of Europe was based on 3 pillars. It was cheap resources, energy from Russia, a very cheap transfer of technology and trade with China, and security was paid by the United States. And suddenly we discovered that all those 3 pillars were built on a very thin ice, just breaking through. And that's the truth. And the first thing, the majority of the European population is even not aware of this one. And that's one of the first steps, because there has to be the courage from all political leaders just to tell the European population the truth, what is the whole thing about. And it's not only about Russia. When we have a view to the African continent, where we see a doubling of the population within the next 25 years, all the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, for me, a real measurable effect where a region is going to develop. And that's not direction the green side, it's moving to the red side on the African continent. So it's an additional threat, I have to say, for our population in Europe. And also already mentioned last year at the Salzburg Summit, the US scientists ended with a slide. You saw someone sleeping in the bed. The alarm was ringing, and the heading was, "The alarm has gone off, but the Europeans didn't get out of bed." When you listen to Rubio during this year's Munich Security Conference, and I could not follow the standing ovations afterwards, because he was not saying anything else than Vance 1 year before. He just put it in a nicer context. And there was a last comment from the French EU minister. He said, it seems that the Europeans, and imagine the picture I've just shown with the bed, were just pushing, after the speech of Rubio, the snooze button on the clock again. So that's the situation we are facing currently. Maybe I come back later then when I come to Austria, what is the position of Austria. But definitely there's a huge gap between, let's say, what politicians, and I'm not reducing that to one country, are telling, are discussing, and the actions you see on the other side. And the last point, we have this 800 or even 1,000 billion amount of what we're going to spend into our European defense. I mean, 90% of this money is not going to be invested into the European armament industry, because it's simply not able in this time frame. We're thinking about the next 5 to 10 years to build up those forces to follow all the contracts some of the nations are willing. And a lot of nations also in Europe are even not willing to buy in Europe. There's still this reliability to do that in the United States.
Thank you. You already described that gap. That would have been a follow-up question. So I'm moving to Austria, and would ask as a follow-up: would Austria have to be able and willing to contribute to shared security that it currently does not?
I mean, we have to make a difference. what Austria is doing in UN missions. I personally was a commanding officer in Kosovo, the multinational task force South. So I was commanding a Turkish battalion, 2 Germans, and an Austrian Swiss battalion. That's just very much related to what we always hear. Austria is military neutral. I say it's a smile because my chain of command was a US admiral in NATO, by the way. So we have to differ. What Austria is really engaged in various missions, also in military stuff and so on. On the other side, I say it here that since I'm retired, since the 1st of January, I can say that quite openly. I mean, what I cannot follow, and I didn't follow also in the past, is this term military neutrality, which is extensively used by Austrian politicians. It's not in the context of the European security architecture. It's always related to internal national business issues, just to tell the population something. And this term military neutrality has nothing to do with the Austrian constitution. We are not going to find this term military neutrality neither in the Austrian constitution nor in some Austrian laws, by the way. So that's the first step towards the others. And we had a small discussion at the very beginning. When I was military representative in Brussels to the European Union and NATO, my goal was that Austria should become again a reliable, accountable, and capable partner. Regarding capability, I mean, specifically those serving here in Austria know there's the Aufbauplan 2032. In the current coalition paper, you even have a 2% limit to be achieved. We're moving away from this again, very much related to what I've said before. But definitely Austria has to get rid of this using term, we are military neutral if it comes uncomfortable. And I bring you one example, is the participation in the EU mission, training mission for Ukraine. Is that against the Austrian constitution? There's a simple answer, it's not, because it's neither participating in a military organization, and it's also not the permanent stationing of troops in Austria. And that's very much in Austria, you very often have this discussion. It's very much related to what we think about neutrality, of being neutral, and not what other countries are thinking about Austria. Are they really neutral? Bring a lot of examples there.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We might come back to that also in the wider discussion with the public here. But I wanna go back to Ulrich and ask, where do you think Europe is currently misreading the nature of the threat environment? What are we getting fundamentally wrong?
Well, the first question in this question, there is the word Europe. And of course, we need always to be very precise. What do we mean by Europe in a way?
I don't mean the EU.
Beyond the EU,
Yeah,
apparently.
yeah,
But we talk about the EU institutions, the member states, non-EU states, European societies. So, and I think in all these different levels, we can see there is not necessarily a conversion of the threat perception and of the threat assessment. To some extent, this is also understandable. I mean, also within plural democracies, you have different voices, you have different opinions, you have different assessments. I think that's for some. I mean, it's to a certain extent that's I think that's understandable, and we cannot. There's no way around that. So I think this will probably always be with us. But on the other hand, of course, if we say that there is no unified threat perception, also and shared threat assessment, also not on the political level, and that there's not the same sense of urgency and also not the same focus on Ukraine, for instance, in all also EU member states, then of course it is very difficult to come up with decisions, with joint decisions. And this is what we also see. We see that While 4 years ago, when the full-scale invasion started, we saw a much more unified, a much more determined European Union, I think, in reacting to Russia's aggression. I would say that over the past 4 years, at the beginning, Europe has been much more united. While now, I would say that there's more divergence in reacting, in discussing. Also, there are other crises in the world who matter more to other societies and other people and other leaders within the European Union. And also, we have not been able to build up a good structure for supporting Ukraine. Of course, there are some activities within the European Union. There are some activities, mainly humanitarian aid, financial aid. Then there is NATO involved. There are different groupings supporting Ukraine. There's a lot of bilateral support, but this is very fragmented. It's a very fragmented strategy, if it is a strategy at all. And this is a symptom of what I wanted to say, that we have not been in 4 years of that war, of a major war, which we have not seen since World War II. We were not able to build up a structure where this support and a sustained support in military terms, in financial terms, in humanitarian terms has been organized. Just think about the question of ammunition. So every time there needs to be new rounds of who can organize ammunition for this or that weapons. And then again, ammunition is gone. Oh, wow, what a surprise. And then we have to reorganize it again. So think about what we discussed over the past weeks regarding the Patriots, for instance. Yeah. I mean, we have seen that in the Iran war, in the first few days, more Patriots rockets had been used for air defense than have ever been delivered to Ukraine. The German defense minister over the past weeks or past months, one has to say, had a great problem. I mean, his initiative was to organize 30 plus Patriot rockets for Ukraine. 30 plus. We're talking about, I think, 800 rockets used in the Iran war for defense in the first few days. Yeah, and I think this is a huge gap between what needed to be done, what should have been done, and what is actually done. And also that has to do with the structures, I would say. EU Commissioner Kubilius, when he gives speeches about that, and I found his analysis quite reasonable. He says there are 3 pillars for what he calls readiness for EU defense, and the first pillar is material defense readiness. So this is the capacity question. So the procurement, the finance, the production. And here already we face a lot of problems because of the total fragmentation of the EU industries in this regard. With regard to supporting Ukraine, I have just already illustrated that. That means that the Ukraine often gets what we are prepared or able to deliver, but not necessarily what Ukraine needs. There can be some overlap between the two, but it's not 100%, obviously. Yeah. Then the second pillar is institutional defense readiness, and that's indeed also a big issue, is how to organize defense on the European continent, be it within the European Union, but we also have to look beyond the EU, of course. I think a major issue is the security cooperation between EU states and non-EU states. And here we are in institutional limbo because we lack a framework here. What we see, on the other hand, is that we have that informalization. So we have more informal groupings, minilateral formats, who cover security issues, not necessarily defense issues, but security issues. So we have a very fragmented institutional structure. There are a lot of plans and debates, maybe we can come to that later. A European pillar within NATO, a European Security Council as something reacting to that institutional issue. So maybe we can discuss it later. And the third pillar he is mentioning is the political defense readiness. And these are the points we had already discussed earlier about how to mobilize the political will, both at the level of the political decision makers as well as support from the societies. And I think in all these three areas, we could see that there was some progress over the past 4 years. I would say, I would not deny that there was some progress. If I look in particular in the German debates, I think there was a huge change in Germany after February 22. But we also saw over the past 4 years a number of backlashes. So we made progress, but we also have backlashes in all three pillars at the same time.
Thank you very much. I want to continue what has been mentioned by Ulrich and come back to Ionela and ask, is the European Union currently prioritizing strategically or just accumulating responsibilities faster than it can build capacity?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I will continue with the discussion because I read a lot of interesting ideas were pointing out on some of the things that we are also the Martin Center working on and been working for the past 3 years. When it comes to what the European Union is doing, for my view, it's that the EU is working strategically because currently what it tries to do, at least this is the least common denominator between the 27 member states, because we know how the decision making is taken in Brussels. The member states have agreed for the European Union to cover that gap in defense capabilities that exist between NATO and the member states, and to prioritize defense capabilities such as strategic enablers, which are needed by the European in case that we'll have the discussion about the potential American retreat from Europe, and also promoting those coalition of capabilities which were included in the strategic documents launched by the European Commission last year, especially on the European Defense Readiness Roadmap. Which all of these follow the NATO standards. So what's important to mention is that what the EU is doing currently, it's basically trying to cover those capabilities that the Europeans need in order to become security providers for the continent, even without the Americans, and also to support the member states through different financial mechanisms in order to procure those capabilities, because as my colleagues were mentioning, most of the European states also are dealing with economic or inflation crisis due to the previous situation, how the war in Ukraine has influenced the economy in Europe, and of course now probably the war in Iran would also create a lot of economic pressure on the member states. So they will still need to deliver on defense and increase their defense budget, but at the same time they will have to make sure that there is a popular support for that. And from a political perspective here, the European Union can help. But as my colleagues were also mentioning, we have to prioritize the European made in Europe products, basically, because this is the only way how we can build economies of scale in Europe, and how we can also politicians can find arguments that they can sell to their citizens that we are also building new factories, we are retraining people, we are basically transforming the auto sector into something that then can develop into a defense or dual use defense component innovation companies that can produce also added value for the European states. So we have this discussion nowadays on how to create that strength into Europe. And I would say that the European Union had those security and defense capabilities according to the treaties, but for the past 3 decades, no one, or at least there wasn't a political appetite from the member states to implement them. If we remember from the Lisbon Treaty, we have Article 42.7, which is similar with Article 5 of NATO, so it's a collective defense clause. The only difference is that at the EU level, there is not a need to have an European Council meeting and a vote to consensus in order to activate that. The activation is automatically. There is also very clearly stated in the Lisbon Treaty, because we also have Article 222, which is solidarity clause, which mentions that a member state has some legal obligation according to the European law to support other member states in a situation of crisis, even through military support. So we have the theoretical and legal basis. We don't need any treaty changes. What was lacking was the political willingness to operationalize all these concepts and instruments that the EU had, which I believe that things are changing. And from Brussels, maybe I will offer a more optimistic perspective that the EU is moving quite fast. If we look at the whole picture and we are zooming out a bit, we are seeing that in the past 3 years, a lot of things have been developing on the security and defense. There is more political willingness and coordination on that. We have, for the first time in the EU history, a commissioner for defense and space, Andreas Kubilius, he was mentioned. We have now a full committee on security and defense in the parliament. Previously was a subcommittee. We have more meetings at the level of ministers of defense, in the meetings of the foreign affairs in the European Council. But I agree with what was mentioned. It's not enough, and I agree that on the material defense readiness, a lot of things has been done. At least on a theoretical point of view, we have all the strategic document launched by the Commission in the past 2 years, on which now the member states have to implement them if they want to become responsible for their security. So it's now on the hands of the member states, but there is a lot of questions on the political defense readiness, and here I feel like there is differences between ideological groups. We have the radical right, who it's more inclined to support this pro-peace movement, but for them pro-peace is something which is instrumentalized in supporting the idea of Ukraine giving up fighting for their survival and accepting a capitulation to Russia. That's the pro-peace movement of the radical right and far right in Europe. And then, of course, we have politicians who would not like to commit and take the leadership in promoting these sometimes unpopular decisions that we have to do more on defense, while meaning that we might need to make some cuts on social welfare or social security. But on the side, because the Martin Center is slash political foundation for the European People's Parties, which is center-right political family, slash think tank, the EPP, it's basically at the front of working on these discussions, trying to find a coherent approach on how to build what we are calling it joint European Defense Union, basically making sure that the EU can build a common defense market and industry, that the EU can work more on developing its technological and innovative capabilities in order to be able to play in this global race on technology innovation between the United States and China, as we are lagging behind quite dramatically. And we know that those emerging and disrupting technologies have also an important effect on the battlefield and on wars, as we are seeing from Ukraine. There is also the discussion of military mobility, which is not only a discussion from the EU side, it's a discussion also from NATO, but the difference is that the EU has its own funds, which they can put on supporting the member states to strengthen their infrastructure, especially on the eastern flank, in making sure that in a case of an attack, we can move troops and ammunition or capabilities from Germany, for example, to Romania. And also we need to build what it's called the military Schengen, basically making sure that those tanks will not stay 2 weeks at the border because we don't have a streamlined legislation in moving the military convoys. So it's a lot of work which we have to do, but I feel like the discussions are ongoing in Brussels on all these elements, and I believe that there are also 4 main projects of common interest which are also important for NATO if they will be implemented. It's the drone defense initiative. We need to fight against those drones. We are seeing from Ukraine how important the anti-drone wall is. The European air shield, we need to build our capabilities in order to protect our infrastructure and our cities, and especially civilian infrastructure, against missile attacks. There is this idea of the Eastern Flank Watch, and we need to work more with NATO because they have their own initiative, which is called the Eastern Sentry, in making sure that we can protect our continent and especially the Eastern Flank against also hybrid attacks, because let's be very clear. Russia, it's not only attacking Ukraine. Russia, it's also attacking countries in NATO and the European Union through hybrid tactics. We see that in the Baltic region, we see that in the Black Sea region. And of course, the European space shield, because we are starting to realize that satellites are quite important in fighting against, an enemy, an aggressor. So I would say to conclude that the EU is doing a lot, and there is a lot of initiative, a lot of motivation, a lot of ideas in Brussels, especially in the think tank and some of the political families. But the problem is that I feel like we don't have the same level of urgency or understanding in the capitals. And then no matter what Brussels is doing, if the member states are not implementing, then we have a problem.
Okay, thank you. I have another round of questions. There will comment.
No,
Open the question. Yeah, so it's here, comment there. Then I have a follow-up question for you, and then we go back to Ionela, and then we open the floor. All right?
No, I just want to come back to one point Ionela mentioned earlier, and I think this is also, we have to take that into the equation, and this is, I think the nature of the threat we are talking about is even more fundamental in this regard, because with Putin and Trump, the EU faces 2 enemies who want to undermine and destroy the European Union. But they use different means, of course, and Putin and Trump are not the same in this regard. Putin uses force and war, war of different type, hybrid and conventional warfare. Trump uses tariffs and political blackmailing. And for those for these kind of mafia-style politics, they, and here I come back to the point you raised earlier, both basically use also anti-EU forces and parties within our own societies. Most of them actually just met a few days ago in Budapest at the Congress to support the biggest pro-Kremlin figure in the European Union, Viktor Orban. So you could go through the list of participants and then you see who I'm talking about, and it would also be good, but that's only in brackets if the EPP in the European Parliament would not join forces or occasional cooperation with some of these parties and groups in the European Parliament, which happened before. But this is more like Manfred Weber has to deal with that, I think. But it's part of the same story, I would say. And this makes me, and this is a process which goes on, and it's also not totally, it's also successful to some extent. If you look at voter results in the different societies, the increasing support of right-wing populist parties. Of course, this differs very much from member state to member state and so on and so on. But that brings me back to this point also you mentioned about the mutual assistance article in the treaty, Article 42.7. And you're right saying that this article is to some extent even stricter than Article 5 of NATO treaty. And it defines an obligation for the member states to offer mutual assistance with all the means available in case of military aggression against any of them, any of the member states. But at the end of the day, this is legal. Legally, it's clear. Theoretically, it's clear. But from a practical level, and if you look into what I just described about what we have this situation in European societies, with certain anti-EU parties, it's up to the member states how this mutual assistance basically look like. So, and I mean, this article has been triggered once by France in 2015, I think, after the terrorist attacks in November. And then, of course, the member states provided a list of different activities, and everybody somehow was engaging, some more symbolically, some more substantially, and so on and so on. So this clause for me has also a certain danger, of course, because I think this European solidarity with this clause might be tested rather soon, maybe sooner than later. And then, of course, the question is whether that we will have the response, whether we will see the response, or whether in our societies we see a lot of unwillingness and even forces who don't want to respond, not at all, who really deny the solidarity. And that will then be, for the European Union, a major issue, a major problem. It will maybe be the end of the European Union. If in a very severe case, this solidarity, which is asked for by a member state, will not be responded, but more or less denied, because solidarity denied will destroy any trust within the European Union. And I see this, so we have to take into account the societal level, which comes into when we think about Article 42.7.
So it's not so much the scenario.
What you are saying, but I also want to hear, just 1 second. I agree with what you are saying, but I also would like to add here that the same case is for NATO. If there will be an attack on the European countries and we will not have a response from NATO, also it's the end of the credibility of NATO.
Absolutely, yeah, the same goes for NATO. Yeah.
Very good. You put it much more eloquently than I could have done. So thank you for that, because that would have been my comment. Of course, feel free to comment on whatever you want, but I want to add to this, because as it has been mentioned now a couple of times, 42.7, and I already see someone in the audience who will raise a question about Austria and NATO. I would ask the question, if that is so clear on paper, Will we actually need Austria in NATO because the obligation within the European Union is so much bigger, at least in the treaties?
Many questions. Let's start. When we talk about the, call it European security architecture, we do not have an organizational problem. Why? With the accession of Sweden and Finland to NATO, 97% of the EU citizens are represented within NATO. So when it comes realistically to an attack, however, cyber, conventionally, and so on, from Russia to a European member state, and I have a look to the map, it's automatically a NATO Article 5, because conventionally, they're all NATO nations. We're talking about the north, it's Ireland, hardly to be attacked from Russia, I have to say, and beside the underwater infrastructure and so on. It's about Austria, it's about Malta, and Cyprus. And Cyprus has already expressed a very clear political will that it would like to join NATO, maybe even more now being attacked from the Middle East. Ireland has a specific security agreement with UK, so also quite safe. Malta in a very vicinity to Italy. So the only which remains is Austria. And I come back later to this one. So I don't see an organizational problem. And because you have the NATO command and force structure with thousands of people, no one is intending, and no one, I mean, none of the NATO nations and also the EU nation is considering to build up to double the NATO command and force structure on the EU side, because there's already a resources issue. Even in the NATO command and force structure, you have a huge lack of officers and NCOs covering those fields. So that's one thing I don't see, and therefore it's quite an academic discussion if it's Article 42.7, is it Article 5, because in reality, if the Baltic states are going to be attacked, definitely the military defense of this region is a NATO issue. However, and I'm absolutely with you, you have a very similar problem there. Does it come at the first stage to a NATO decision to send troops? We're talking about, see it from a military point of view, if you consider a Russian attack to the Baltic states, consider the decision-making process even within NATO, even when we have quite, and military mobility is a good example between the organizational cooperation between NATO and the European Union. You have the JSEC in Ulm, which is determining which are the priority corridors where troops are moving. On the other side, you have the 10T initiative of the Commission, let's say paying for that, what is required on the side. And of course, you have this, when I take one of the corridors, it's the Netherlands, it's Germany, and Poland. So you have trilateral arrangements to operationalize the ideas of moving troops from A to C. So that's on the same.
If we have the bridges, Germany.
Yeah, yes, but that's something which within the 10T initiative should then be financed. And however, a lot of papers and discussions are happening. The first obstacle I'm seeing is the speed, because we are far too slow to implement, even when we have a common agreement. And we have another issue. We have definitely a political unwillingness to overcome the fragmentation in the armament sector. And we have quite good examples in the bad sense. When we talk about the success of the Eurofighter, we are far away from implementing a common initiative. What should be the next generation in this area? One issue we completely, because you said the intent of the United States and Russia is to destroy Europe. I don't think that we have the goal to destroy Europe, but when we have a geopolitical view,
Current government.
the geopolitical view, it's about the new economic area rising is the Indo-Pacific. So that's priority one. The intent of both is to make Europe as a player irrelevant in this region. And that's what has already been done. When I see all the challenges around Europe, we definitely engage for the next decades. to sort out all those issues, even building up our own defense. I think that's a very important issue when we talk. We're almost a minority in the world. We're talking about 8 billion people living in the world. 1 billion belonging to the global West, Europe and the United States, and we discovered there are obviously 2 global Wests. The global East, when I count together China, Russia, and so on, approximately 2 billion. And the other 5 billion is the global South, which we are, in Europe at least, we are not even, how to say, taking them into account in terms of talking about the European security architecture, how to meet them on the same level. When we talk, and global South for me is from South America, Africa, Middle East, up to India. So that's the whole region, which I would supplement under this term. And that's definitely, if we do not recognize that those 5 billion, take it as a number, one other important issue to consider when we talk about the role or the security of Europe within the next decades. But just wanted to make this point.
Very good. Thank you very much. Ionela, anything to reply to the replies?
Yes, I would agree with some of the things that were said, but I would say that in terms of the European Union looking at the global South, and I'm using this term because, well, the countries in the global South, they don't like to be called the global South, so I'm using it with cautious. Things are changing. We see that now with all these different geopolitical tensions between United States and China, a lot of countries in the global South, they are approaching the European Union for more cooperation because the EU is still a reliable partner who is still following the international rule-based model. So we have now the signature of the Mercosur economic deal. I know that because of some issues in Europe, it's only partially implemented, but we still have a political decision on the Mercosur. We have the mother of all the deals, as President von der Leyen mentions, with India, so an economic trade partnership with India, but also security and defense partnership with India. We also have now a new security and defense partnership with Australia. There is this idea to have also, we have one with Canada and UK from last year. And of course, there might be also the interest to strengthen more the cooperation with other countries in Latin America, but also in Indo-Pacific and of course in Africa. So the EU starts to basically become what we can call it the third pillar, the only pillar now of the international system that would like to preserve the multilateral international rule-based order, and it's becoming attractive to other countries in the global South because of this.
I had the feeling you wanted to reply to that. Well, my question
yes, I mean, yes, you're right. We have a lot of talks. Mercosur is a very good example on the one side, but a very bad one on the other side. But the actual treaties, the global South countries, and I call them again global South countries, are doing with China, with India, and so on. Yes, we have the first contract with India 10 years or 15 years too late. Yes. It's again about speed. It's nice that we recognize that India is a good partner, but in the meantime, a lot of other regions, and India, by the way, is member of BRICS. We still forget BRICS is definitely an instrument, is a counterweight to issues. At least the Global East is using this BRIC instrument also to let's say to treat them on the same level. And when we have looked to the current situation in Iran, a lot of ships are passing through the Strait of Hormuz. You could say, it's China, it's India, and so on. So obviously, they make their arrangements. Yes, I'm absolutely with you, Ionara. It's good that Europe has recognized that we should do something, but far too late again. And it's about speed. And it's again the issue, are all those initiatives really supported by all the EU, at least by the important EU nations? That was the reason I just wanted to mention, because otherwise it's like, yeah, everything is moving to the positive side, which I definitely do not see, because I'm missing the speed, and again the common political willingness of the member states of the European Union to speed up also in this area.
Okay, thank you. So please, here we go. Gunther, but tell us who you are in case there's one or two people that don't know you.
Thanks a lot. My name is Günther Schillinger. I'm the chairman of the Austrian Committee for NATO membership. And my first question is to Minister Stallinger, do you want to be the honorary president of our committee? And to our German professor, is it not a little bit degrading for Germany towards Austria that there is no debate about Austrian neutrality in Germany? For 4 years we are in the war, and you basically carry the whole burden of the defense for Ukraine. You give 12 billion only in 2026. Yeah, you have basically given all your old military equipment, and you're producing massive amounts of new military equipment. And Austria has done basically zero, no money directly from Austria to Ukraine, only in the amount of some millions, some humanitarian help. We have not been in the veto in Germany, in the EU, that was one thing, but we have not done anything militarily for Ukraine in 4 long years, and we won't, and Germany doesn't care. And Germany not even bothers to discuss it. And it's a bit like we would be an alpine joke, irrelevant, and we are a 500 million euro economy, we are 9 million people, and we are also a serious member of the European Union. And why don't you at least take our immoral positions so serious that you discuss it?
Maybe just to make one issue, Austria spent a lot of money. Within the European Peace Facility, we really spent the money proportional to our economic situation. That's broadly, and I was 22 months in Brussels, so none of the EU nations was criticizing the support. It was broadly accepted that Austria is not contributing military means, but if it comes up to finance issues, and I think it's about now 350 million euros what Austria spent into the European Peace Facility. It's blocked by Hungary, that's another story, but Austria definitely has done its part in the framework of the support for Ukraine. And it was never criticized. Also not in the, let's say, I'm not talking about official meetings, I'm talking about the famous small talks and others, or if you meet. So that was broadly accepted. So I just wanted to put that into the right. So.
Good, follow up over?
Sweden gave 7 billion in weapons, and Finland 3.5 billion in 4 years. We have given Syria 0.
Again, it's a lot of money for also.
But I realized from media reports that Austria is already very interested in being part of the reconstruction of Ukraine. So because then it's about Austrian companies also earning money from or getting money, profiting from the reconstruction efforts when the war ends at a certain point. And of course, a lot of things have to be done in Ukraine. And I realized that there was a big delegation from Austria with all the business people, industry people from Kiev to also participate on that. So I think this is maybe something. But as a German, I hesitate to say a lot about Austrian politics. I know that is not very well received in Austria. If you as a German start talking about Austria, I mean, I know that from my private life, being engaged with an Austrian woman, you better be more cautious here. And I think also this finger pointing to others is a bit problematic. At least I would rather focus more on the German situation. And I think you're right. Germany became also in absolute numbers, of course, not in relative numbers, the strongest supporter of Ukraine in Europe. And but that is this is also Germany had to go a long way. Because I mean, I have criticized German politics after 2014 already a lot about not really reacting to what we have seen in Ukraine and Crimea already since then. So it needed a complete U-turn in German politics, which happened then in 2022, in February 22. And the term Zeitenwende, which Chancellor Scholz used, was not so much meant as a term for the international audience, but more a term in front of the German public, because somehow he had to legitimize a complete U-turn in Germany's security policy, in defense policy, in Germany's energy policy, and in Germany's Russia policy. So in a way, we have our own kind of problem with our own history, where we were late and have done too little before.
Thank you. So yes, good. Then first Georg and then Robin Munoz.
The Danube region. Mr. Orban was mentioned, and I wonder if he is still on the Western side in case he gets re-elected and his party. I would remind on what he has said in 21-22, and he said Hungary must be on the winner's side, and he would let the Russian army move through. He would not oppose. Yeah. Now we always think after Ukraine, if it gets defeated, there may be the Baltic states, Scandinavia, then Poland. However, if Mr. Orban lets the Russian army through, I mean, given that Ukraine is sort of disappearing and losing, then the next country would be Austria, and interesting because to the south of Germany. So what about this danger? How do you classify it?
When we take a second question already here, please.
Yes, I'd be very interested in the views of the panel as to what the European Union countries can do in relation to the 300 billion euros, or is it dollars, of money frozen mainly in Belgian banks. It seems to me that it's a sort of open and shut case to use this money now for the defense of the Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. And anyone want to comment on?
I can comment on the last question. From my understanding, because this is not my area of expertise, but from my understanding, the current common political decision, because it's a very sensitive decision on how to use the Russian frozen money, which are at the Euroclear institution here in Belgium, it's to use the profit of those money for helping Ukraine, and there is still not a lack of political willingness, especially from Belgium, in order to accept to basically use the entire money, because their fear is that they might be sued in an international tribunal by Russia, and they want security guarantees, or legal guarantees from other member states of the EU that they will support Belgium in case that will happen. So basically, this is what I know so far. The current decision is that they might use the profit of those money to Ukraine, and we still have to find, the political willingness to move forward, and also basically take those 300 billions of euros to be used for the reconstruction of Ukraine, because at the end of the day, Russia is the aggressor.
Thank you. Additionally to that, or?
No, I think in a way it's a bit of a sideshow. I would say it should not distract us, from the main issues to some extent. I mean, the attempt was made. There was this discussion. There was the summit on that. But the solution which has been found is actually not too bad, because The EU has put now this 90 billion on the table. At the moment, it's a big problem because it's blocked by Orban again, despite the fact that he has agreed initially on that in the council, I think, which is a major problem. But we will see how this looks like after the elections. So in the end, I think if you just take the summit result, I think it was not a bad decision actually, even if Chancellor Merz, he had a different agenda, of course. But the result is you have the 90 billion if Ukraine gets it. And the frozen Russian assets are still there, and they can be used otherwise. And I think they will be used one day. And as has been said, the profits are already used now. I mean, they are already used now, so there is some money going to Ukraine. On the other question,
Sure, go on. Yeah.
Well, that's a very grim scenario, I have to say, which I mean. Which already assumes that Ukraine will no longer exist, basically, or will be totally controlled by Russia, which I think is an unlikely scenario to my point of view. But I'm not a military expert, but I don't think that Russia is capable at the moment really to control all over Ukraine, not to speak to defeat Ukraine in this severe way. I think this is, I don't see that. And then of course you would never know what actually Hungary or others are doing. I think there would certainly be some kind of reaction, be it from NATO or other side beforehand. So I don't think that this is a real probable scenario. At least I cannot imagine that. I might be wrong, of course, but I don't think. I mean, we should always say that Orban words are for the domestic audience. Yeah. So everything he says, also now at the moment when he talks more about foreign policy, security policy, he prevents World War III and all whatnot he's talking about right now in the election campaign in order to avoid talking about the situation of Ukrainian hospitals, talking about the inflation, talking about the economic situation in Hungary. So he's not talking about this. He's only focusing on this threat coming from Brussels, forcing Hungary into a war with Russia, and that's his only agenda. And this is just for domestic reasons for this election campaign.
Thank you. It's great that we have a military expert here. So there we go.
I don't see the Russian armed forces at all to be able to occupy Ukraine. I mean, if you look what they're able to do, to move a little bit forward, a little bit backwards. So from a military point of view, even unimaginable. No threat at all. So Hungary will even not come in a position to guide Russian troops through their own country. And there's also a societal aspect in Hungary. I mean, they were occupied by Russian forces quite grimly for decades. So I cannot imagine that the Hungarian population then waves the flag and moves, and the Russian forces move over from a military point of view. I don't see that. The Baltic states somehow they are in danger. Yes. Maybe not as a whole, but definitely. So also to, let's say, to test how NATO as an organization is reacting. That's quite difficult. And imagine, and it's quite a good example currently in the Gulf War. Europe does not have the military capability to project power before using it. I'm talking about aircraft carriers and the aircraft carrier group. One group has the strength, the capabilities of the whole Swedish armed forces. So on one aircraft carrier, there are more fighter aircrafts than the whole Swedish Air Force has. We don't have anything in Europe. We have two aircraft carriers, there's the French one and the UK one, but we are far away from this one. And it's just, we're talking about the carrier group. And we have three ongoing EU naval operations. what we are facing is that the EU nations, it's not about willingness in this case, it's about capabilities. They even cannot provide enough ships for those very small scale and low intensity EU naval operations. So therefore, it also a little bit tricky by Trump to ask European nations to send some frigates to the Strait of Hormuz, because I was thinking about where should those frigates come? Maybe one or two. So that was quite intentionally also done by Trump. On the one side, to show that there is no common political will, even with a common statement towards this one. I didn't hear anything. But also on the other side, to prove, look, Europeans, you're so much incapable, even in issues like freedom of navigation. And when we talk about future scenarios, Strait of Taiwan, I mean, heavily economic issues involved of the Europeans, how would we be able to contribute to an international mission to ensure freedom of navigation in the Strait of Taiwan? So far away. And also, I mentioned this example because also these procurement issues are so much focused at the current state. What are we going to do on the conventional sides toward Russia? And there were also sides, for example, it was Petraeus talking, said, are we procuring the right things? In terms of, when we talk about procurement, it's about threats which are going to happen in 5, 10, 15 years. And this crucial question definitely has to put forward. And it's not just about Russia. Yes, it's also about Russia, but there are also a lot of other capabilities the Europeans are missing. And when we talk about our economic dependencies, lines of communication, naval lines of communication, and so on, it's definitely an area where I don't see too much. And we even didn't talk about space. So far away, let's imagine that the US switches off GPS. Galileo is not in a position to replace GPS. By the way, all the military equipment and so on is based on the GPS signals. It simply cannot switch one satellite to the other and say, okay, now we get the signal from a Galileo satellite.
Thank you. We are coming to the end, but if there is a burning question in the room, I'm happy to take it. Quick commercial break though. We have been talking about Hungary and future scenarios. We just recently published future scenarios on the Hungarian election. We'll also present them next week. So we, of course, can't predict how it will go, but if you're interested what might come after, they are also here on the table and can be found here. Thank you, Sophia. My last question, because also you just mentioned we are procuring the wrong things and we are not taking into consideration.
I didn't say we are procuring the wrong things, but we have to rethink, are we procuring the right things?
Right. See, also here you framed it much more eloquently than I did, but in any case, the final question I would have for the whole panel, and I would go through in reverse order than we started, is if we meet again in 5 years, or then 10 or 15, pick your own time frame. What is one concrete change or a decision, a capability, maybe even a political shift that would make you say Europe has actually become more serious about its own security?
I take the picture which I was throwing at the very beginning. So the Europeans did get out of bed. Overcame, there was a political. They overcome the political, or they have the political willingness to overcome the fragmentations, and we really see some hardware procurement in various areas. So let's say a little bit of wishful thinking, but I was born on a Sunday, so I'm principally an optimist. So and definitely see, and it was already mentioned also by Ronela, as the pressure becomes bigger from day to day, it will also something which the population of Europe is going to get, and then it's also easier for them to follow political decisions, and on the other side, it's easier for politicians to make those strategic decisions.
Thank you. Ulrich?
Well, I like to come back to a point we have talked about earlier, and I think this is also still urgent need, and I would like to see more to come in the next 5 years on that, is strengthening security cooperation between EU and non-EU countries.
Yeah.
I think we need new security formats, something bridging EU, NATO, non-EU, non-NATO states, including Ukraine, of course. And there are different discussions on that. I have mentioned them earlier. From European Security Council, new defense treaty, things like that. We have proposed a paper earlier 2 years ago, something like this. We called it the Greater European Council. It didn't die anyhow, but no matter. So there are ideas around who try to bridge that institutional gap, which I think is there. Because what I think is needed is a strategic linking of security enlargement policy. So we have not pointed to enlargement so much this evening, but I think this is part of a wider security understanding. And enlargement should not just be seen as a technical issue, which goes slowly, as we have seen this with the Western Balkan states. For me, in 5 years, I hope we can talk about an EU 30 plus, maybe including countries like Montenegro, Albania, who seem to be the front runner in the Western Balkan when it comes to enlargement at the moment.
Also NATO members. Also NATO members.
Also NATO members already. They could be then a part of the European Union, but also Moldova and Ukraine, where we already have a very speed process, where the screening processes, all 6 clusters for enlargement have already finished in September last year. And now we see again this blockage in the European Council to officially opening the negotiation of each of the clusters. Of course, on the operational level, they continue. The EU Commission is continuing this. So there are shadow negotiations taking place. It's not that everything is on hold, but we lack still the official backing from the European Council for this official step. So I would like to see Albania, Montenegro, Moldova, and Ukraine as being part of that wider enlarged EU. And maybe we get Iceland more quicker than we.
Thank you. And then, Ionela, I hope you were also born on a Sunday and don't leave us in a depressing state, but rather in an optimistic one.
Yes, of course, I will try to have an optimistic conclusion. Well, I was thinking about both on NATO and the EU side. On the NATO side, I would feel more confident if we will be able to implement that commitment of 5% GDP for defense, because that will show that we in Europe are taking our serious threats very, very seriously. So we are doing work on that. And of course, we have to have the discussion about the reform of NATO, either through building the European pillar of NATO or the Europeanization of NATO. So I would like to see more development on that as well. And of course, I would like to see more European military leaders taking leadership roles in the NATO command and control structures, because we also this will be very important for building that European pillar of NATO in the future. On the EU side, of course, my hopes as an expert which works a lot on European defense, it's to have the implementation of all these strategic documents proposed by Commissioner Kubilius and the European Commission, to have an increasement of the defense budget in the next multi-annual financial framework from to at least 150 billion of euros, and to I'm still an idealist, so I'd like to have the operationalization of the Article 42.7 and to start doing more on constructing the European Common Defence Market, which will also solve some of the fragmentation and lack of interoperability in our systems for the moment, while also including Ukraine and basically integrating Ukraine industries and defense and the lessons from Ukraine in our capacities. And of course, I will end by the implementation of the European Security Council. I know it was mentioned currently. I also agree with this idea. I recently published a policy brief on how to have a European Security Council based on Article 20 of the Lisbon Treaty, so basically on enhanced cooperation principles. So if you are interested more about my ideas, it's available on the Martin Center website. So I feel like there is a lot of work that can be done. There are a lot of interesting ideas that can contribute to making Europeans stronger and more safe and secure. Now we have to do the work, basically.
Thank you very much. And that concludes our discussion. So first and foremost, of course, a big round of applause to my wonderful panel. I learned a lot. I heard about, for the first time, about military Schengen. That on the one hand brings back memories where we, for the last time, cooperated with the Bulgarian embassy and the Croatian embassy and also the Romanian embassy when we talked about the actual Schengen enlargement. It also brings back a little bit of trauma, I have to say. So I'm not sure if I want to talk about military Schengen in that framework, but I'm of course very, very happy that we have continued our cooperation and that we had the possibility to work with you again on what I believe is a much more positive and necessary topic, from challenge to capability. So a big thank you to Her Excellency, Madam Ambassador, and also to Igor Kolov as Secretary of the Embassy of Croatia. Thank you very much, and a big round of applause. And then there is, of course, always also people involved that are working not so much in the front, but a lot in the back, which is very important as well. So I want to mention also Carmen Pizarro, who has been working with us and my team at IDM together with Igor Koller to making this reality. It took a couple of months to actually make it happen, but I think it was well worth the wait. I also would like to thank, of course, Sophia Beiter, who was involved from the very beginning in making this happen. And then there is a lot of people that we don't see, but we see the output that they are bringing in designing the nice banners and taking care of the stream in the background. I want to mention here, of course, Ilaria, our trainee, but also our colleagues Nino, Elena, and another trainee, Jovan, whom you met in the entrance. So thank you very much, and a big round of applause. I always have the easiest job. I just need to read out some questions. So I had a lot of fun here. That was, as I said, very interesting. We chose this date actually for a reason, because today, on the one hand side, it's a very important anniversary. It's the anniversary of the Treaties of Rome. So I think this is also something that we should not forget when we talk about NATO and the EU cooperation and enhancing capabilities. But on the other hand, it is also it would have been the 85th birthday of our long-term chairman, Erhard Busek. And I think it's no coincidence that they share this day. We had yesterday a wonderful event commemorating this, and I'm pretty sure that Erhard would have enjoyed this discussion, and Erhard would also have enjoyed to have some Croatian and Bulgarian wine afterwards. So I hereby invite you and generously thank you again for the generous support of the two embassies that also provide some culture from them, and we can continue to talk about one or the other topic outside while enjoying the wine. Sorry, Ionela, that you can't have that, but maybe I save some for you for the next time when you come to Vienna.
For the next time, that's for
yeah.
sure. And I
Thank you
hope
very
that
much.
we'll have the opportunity to cooperate again and see each other in person at the next event.
Absolutely. And with this, thank you very much again, and please enjoy.
Thank you. Have a nice evening from Brussels. Bye-bye.
A lot of units have made sure that
Which you go for here.